The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. In October 2015, our CEO Bob Chapman's book, Everybody Matters: The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, was released, which continues to bring Bob and Barry-Wehmiller's message of truly human leadership to a much larger audience. It's hard to imagine that a company that once had its coffee machines repossessed is now a $3 billion organization with more than 12,000 team members around the world. On this episode, Bob talks about the early days of Barry-Wehmiller, how our early experiences shaped our thinking about caring for our people, and why our business strategies are an important part of our commitment to caring for our people. Now, here's Bob Chapman.
Honestly, when you think back on the early days when we began this journey in 1984, and we began doing acquisitions with absolutely no money, I always say it's like going shopping without your wallet. And I think of the story, every acquisition, like every person's got a unique story. It astounds me that we've achieved the level of success we have. And I believe it's attributed to when we began. Our Bob Lanigan, our senior director, said, in our company we call this "you bet your ass." In other words, if you fail, it's all over. So when we began when failure to do an acquisition wasn't a disappointment, it would have been a disaster. And so we brought from the very beginning an incredible discipline and intensity. And again, I did a study. I once had an opportunity to speak at a graduate business school on acquisitions, and KPMG did a study that said 77% of all acquisitions fail to achieve their objective. And in our case, that's mathematically impossible because our share price has grown in this period of time, 14% a year compounded for 25 years, mainly driven by acquisitions. So I believe it's an amazing achievement from my perspective, because everyone is a challenge. Everyone is a unique set of circumstances. And to see that we are approaching 100, and in fact, our pace is increasing because we've got this cadence, this discipline, this focus. And in my opinion, from my experience, not many people bring that to acquisitions. And that's allowed us to not only achieve great results in acquisitions, and we now like to call them adoptions, as you know. So nobody wants to be acquired, but everybody would love to be adopted. So I think it's quite a milestone, and the DNA of our company now is very much of a company that's acquisitive, and we have good disciplines around it. And I think we began for the right reason with the right intensity, and it served us well for 30 years.
Why do you think we've been so successful?
Because we couldn't afford not to be. Again, if death is the alternative to everything you do, you're going to take it pretty seriously. And again, we were so fragile when we began that if we failed to make the acquisition work, the company would have died because we couldn't afford any failures because we were so fragile. So we began not because we had a lot of cash and we had a need. Most people start doing acquisitions because they got this cash, they got the capital, and they want to get into these markets, and they tend to overpay and don't know what to do when they get it. And so we began just the opposite. We began with no cash. So if an acquisition failed, we were dead. And that's what our board told us, and they were right. And the good news is the first acquisition we did, which was a company called Inex, was massively successful.
What did the company do?
They made electronic inspection equipment for the glass industry. It's based in Colorado, and we had it's about a $3.5 million company, breaking even. They'd been bought by a South African company. They overpaid for it. Price of gold went down in South Africa, so they wanted to get rid of this company that hadn't worked out. They don't own it for a few years. We had a small electronics company in Florida that was breaking even. I thought, well, if I could put these two together, we could get some synergy. So it was a pretty simple idea. But when I got into it, we saw some unbelievable opportunities. So we took those two $3.5 million companies breaking even. One making electronic inspection equipment for the beverage industry to inspect returnable containers to make sure they're clean. And then Inex had made electronic inspection equipment for the glass industry, which basically would inspect new glass to make sure there are no defects in the glass that would cause it to be rejected. So we put those two together. So mathematically, it should be a $7 million company, not making much money. And we built, within a matter of 2 to 3 years, a $37 million company that made approach, I think 17%. I think we peaked at like 17% EBITDA margins. So it really leveraged everything that I had learned in college and intensity, because we couldn't fail. And it ended up, to validate it, ended up being the sizzle in our public offering. So we bought that company in '84, and by '87 we'd launched so within 3 years we had launched a public offering in London that was massively 31 times oversubscribed, and the sizzle was this company, these two broken companies that we put together in Clearwater, moved the Colorado operation to Clearwater, put them together, and built a $37 million company that dramatically grew, obviously, from $7 million to $37 million. So, but it was our intensity. We couldn't afford to fail.
Mm-hmm. You called it a you bet your ass, deal. Why did Barry-Wehmiller need to start doing it?
Well, the other way to say it is must do, can't fail. In other words, we had to do it, but we couldn't afford to fail.
So why did Barry-Wehmiller at that time need to do acquisitions?
Well, we had remember in 1983, a lot of things I had done organically, license agreement with an Italian company to make fillers for the beverage industry, a solar energy project with Anheuser-Busch that we were selected to supply. We'd hired a solar engineer out of McDonnell Douglas. And we got into then our basic business. So everything I did to grow the company from its historic base and get in new fields looked dramatic. But '83, each one of those new initiatives ran into substantial challenges, which resulted in us reporting a loss in 1983. And as a result of the magnitude of that loss, our banks pulled on us, which put us into financial crisis from October of '83 until August of '84. And we lived in that period of time day to day on cash. And we finally got refinanced. 1 in a million, we got refinanced in August of '84. Because somebody who used to work in our shipping department's our son, worked at Citicorp in Chicago that would do an asset-based loan with us. So, you talk about a fluke. So they kind of bent over backwards to find a way to do a deal with us when nobody else would touch us, which gave us some level of financing. I always describe it as the kind of people you meet in a dark alley with an envelope. So anyway, we got refinanced. We could actually pay a bill, barely. And I looked around. I went to my finance team, and I looked at them, and I'd been studying Emerson Electric and their growth through acquisitions in mature markets. And I said to the finance team, guys, I'm proud of our history, the 100-year history of the company, serving the brewing industry. But my analysis is that the brewing industry does not give us a future with the technology we had. We need to go out and start acquiring companies, give us a better future. And they looked at me and said, Bob, that's brilliant. We only have one problem. And I said, what's the problem? They said, we don't have any cash. Do you understand that, Bob? We have no cash. And I looked at them, and this is really the turning point for our company. I looked at them and said, I didn't tell you I needed cash. I told you we needed to do acquisition. And I virtually walked out of that room unencumbered by the facts that I had no cash. And I went out fully intending to go out and start acquiring companies. And the first company I acquired was Inex out in Bloomfield Hills, Colorado, which, again, a failing electronics company, but kind of in the same spectrum we were in. So again, that deal saved the company. And I think I paid $1.8 million for this $3.5 million company, but they had $1.2 million of cash on the balance sheet. So, and the other key is that the seller actually had a competing bid that they allowed us to match because they liked me better than they liked this major public company that had made the competing bid. Now, they shouldn't have accepted our bid because, us getting to closing, from deal to closing, was probably marginal because we had to go to the asset-based lender, get the approval. But our asset-based lender approved, and Tony Alty, the guy from South Africa, liked me, and so I always say that relationships are an important part of every deal. If people like you, they'll find a way to work with you. So we were very fortunate for that first deal, was the game changer.
So that would have been the first set of acquisitions leading up to the public offering, right?
That was the first acquisition. A couple of others followed. Stuart Brown in England started buying a company called Ford's that made milk bottle sealing equipment. So, aluminum foil on top of a returnable milk bottle. They made the machine. Somebody was selling that company. Then we bought a company named Dawson that made dairy bottle fillers. And so we had a couple, basically, what do you buy when you have no money? What somebody else doesn't want, and nobody else wants either. And so our first acquisition, our first 4 or 5 acquisitions were companies that nobody wanted. And the beauty of our success is that we saw value where other people didn't see it. And we were able to grow those businesses and develop strategies, competitive strategies with those companies. And it resulted in, obviously, the public offering, where we spun off the acquisitions. The core business that was sick, our historic bottle washer and pasteurizer business, we had to keep because it was like the cancer. So we spun off the acquisitions.
And how did that change the company after that?
Well, we went from having cash day-to-day still under an asset-based loan to actually having $28 million in cash in the balance sheet and no debt. That is like a massive transformation. And the good news is we took the time to we probably spent 9 months counting the cash. If you wanted, I wanted to know what $28 million looked like, and I made sure they gave it to me in ones, so I would take a while. So we spent 9 months counting the cash to believe that we went from being virtually not able to borrow $5 million to get to the public offering, so it was even precarious right up to the end, to having $28 million in the bank and no debt and a $17 million market value for our 30% in the public company. So we now had a semi-liquid asset also of 30% ownership in the public company.
So did our acquisition strategy change after that? Because then after that is when we started diversifying in the packaging business.
Well, the acquisition strategy went from buying things that nobody else wanted. So after the public offering, we spent 9 months just thinking about. I said to the team, God, guys, we grew from 18 million to 72 million in about 4 or 5 years. Phenomenal growth. Then we had catastrophic decline from 72 million to 55 million, where we had the financial crisis. And then the last 3 years, we've acquired these 4 or 5 relatively homeless acquisitions. Nobody really wanted them. We bundled them together, we put them together well, and the market oversubscribed to our $28 million by 35 times, which meant that the amount of money people sent in to buy our stock, which was held in a trust account, actually generated more interest income than the public offering cost us, because it was so over. And Harvard wrote a case study on it. So now we have the experience of 4 or 5 acquisitions, the intense 9 months of intense work on a public offering, and we said we must have learned something. And so we reflected on our learnings and came up with a strategy. And we said, look, we're going to look for companies that had the same challenges these companies, our historic business had and these new companies had. Because what we learned to do is we learned to solve problems. Because we didn't have fortunate to buy companies, good management, high growth markets. So we looked for companies that had similar challenges and that would give us a good balance of markets, products, technology. So we would never find ourselves concentrated in any one technology, in one market. And we called it the strategy for growth, value, and liquidity. We wanted to grow. We wanted the value of our company to be liquid. And we wanted to have a good value by balance. Balance was a huge word. We didn't want to be heavily concentrated in any one technology, any one customer, because something happens, you can't do anything about it. So we learned a lot in that 9 months by thinking back on the previous 10-year journey and saying, what did we learn so we can do it better in the future? Which not many people have the time to actually stop and think and pause and say, what went well and what didn't go well and what did we learn from it and how can we be better? And that strategy that we developed in 1988 and 1989, that strategy was to get us to $100 million with a good balance in the packaging industry, and it actually got us all the way to the $3 billion that we expect this year.
What do you think, in terms of our leadership journey, in terms of your leadership journey, what did those tough times teach you?
I would say to you the biggest thing I learned, it's back in the economic crisis during Ronald Reagan. I remember an article on the Business Week on the back of it said, thank God, Mr. Reagan, for the recession. It was an interesting article, so I read it. Why would somebody thank the President of the United States for recession? Because this family that wrote the article, the lady wrote the article about our family, said, we had 2 cars, we had 2 TVs, we had a nice house, but we both had to work. When we lost our jobs, we went to a very simple life. We had more times with our kids. We weren't chasing things. We were focusing more on what we had, not what we wanted. And I would say to you that between 1983 and 1987, I learned, I had kind of an idea of leading by consensus when I first started. I want you to all be happy. I want us to all agree. And you're all obviously very smart, the people I hired, so I thought, I just need to listen to them. When we hit the crisis, I said, you know what? I'm just going into town with my guns out, and I'm going to shoot everything I can. And I went from consensus to decisiveness. I just said, I got to make the best decision I can. I don't have time for consensus. And you know what? Everybody comes to their decision making with their own preconceived notions, and I just need to. And so I started being very decisive in that period of time. And the value of cash. When you don't have cash, I always say that if you asked a woman who just had a baby, you said, boy, I can imagine that was really an amazing experience. They'd say, you have no idea what it was like to have a child. And I say to you, if somebody ever said to me, boy, I can imagine what it was like when you didn't know if you had cash today, and I said, no, you can't imagine what it's like. When you don't know whether you're going to be able to pay people on Friday, when you see people in the shopping center and you haven't paid them for 6 months, when you're humiliated because they repossess your coffee maker because you haven't paid the coffee maker in 6 months. I always use the example in Les Miserables when Jean Valjean was put in prison because he stole a loaf of bread to help feed his starving sister's kids. And he became very bitter. And I said, nobody knows what it's like when you are desperate enough, and we judge people because he was put in prison in France because he stole a loaf of bread. When you are living day to day without knowing if you can pay people, when you can't pay people, and you got somebody saying, look, if I give you $100, will you give me $5 more of stuff? In other words, every day was a negotiation with everyone because you couldn't pay people. It's humiliating to us, and you never want to be that way. And what I learned is the value of cash. Cash is like the blood in your system. Without it, you're dead. And, my bankers in my growth made my cash available very easy because they really liked me and they thought I was really good. And what they did, they made it too easy for me. And the law of you take on too much. Every one single thing I did, everybody loved what I was doing, but it was a cumulative effect of all the things I was taking on. And then when they all had issues, totally unrelated to each other, and we hit the fan, all of a sudden the very people who gave me my bankers kept saying, Bob, you just need to tell me how much cash you need. Bob, just tell me. We think the world of you. You're one of our best clients. Just tell me how much cash you need. So I'd tell them, and they provide. And this is when interest rates were 22%. And you'd think, how could anybody want their money back? But, it was horrible. And so what we learned is the value of cash. And to this day, we have this cash respect because it is the way in which you can be fair and good to your people. Without that financial integrity, you can't be good to your people. You're going to hurt them. So I would say to you, we learned a tremendous amount about what you need and what you don't need in that period of time, and it shaped the company we are today.
Yeah, and that also supported later on too. Thinking about the many leadership lessons you learned, having a sustainable business is the best way you can care for your people, and those lessons probably worked into that as well.
Well. Again, when you almost die, you think about life differently than when life seems pretty easy. And, if you ever, I think Ronald Reagan, when he was shot by that young man in Washington, D.C., a friend of mine told me that Ronald Reagan was a different man after that attempt because he said God must have saved him for a purpose. And so it gave him you'll hear people who survived something horrendous who say, somebody kept me around. And so I would say to you, we came out of that situation with incredible intensity, and to never put our people at risk again. Because, again, Jim Collins would say, you need to get the right people on the bus, and I say you need to build a safe bus, which is a business model. Really rugged construction. And then you need drivers who know where they're going and how to get there. And then anybody that gets on the bus is going to be fine. So the primary responsibility of a leader is to make sure that they have a good business strategy that gives the people in their care a grounded sense of hope for a better future. I can trust you. I can buy a house. I can have a child. I can plan to retire at this company. I mean, right now people don't feel that level of trust in many businesses, and many businesses fail. And so what we try to do is make sure that we say, where are you going? Why do you want to go there? And when you get there, why will you have taken your people to a better place? Not just, what's your profits and, how you doing? And so it really shaped our language because I'm telling you something, I don't ever want to be in that position. Thank God I was almost broke when I was in my 30s. And it was ugly with young kids and obligations and people, I was the talk of St. Louis in the late 70s because this massive, we were hiring people from all over the world as we grew from 18 to 72 million. But that turns around and becomes just the opposite because now I was the talk of St. Louis because every when our major bank pulled from us, every other bank looked at it, and every credit committee, which is a bunch of people in town, right, on credit committees, they made a decision, nope. And so it was humiliating, but it was also shaped my intensity. From the worst of my challenges have come my greatest learning. And so what we learned, because we happened to survive, and we could have died. I mean, it was so fragile that by surviving it, I never forget. And I'll give you an example, when we were doing very well in the 2006, 2007, people were leveraging their companies up 4 or 5 times the acquisitions. I had this kind of conservative view that you should never leverage your company more than 2.5 times EBITDA. Well, we had people come and say, oh, that's crazy, man. Your return on equity could be so much better. You could make your equity work. You get up to 5 times leverage. Banks are doing that. I said, I don't care. I'm not doing it. And so we kept our company very conservative from my experience in the 70s. And when the economic downturn hit in 08, 09, and everybody else had to hurt people, we didn't because we were strong and we got through it strong. So I would say to you, I would never wish anybody on what I went through, and most people probably wouldn't make it through. I was very fortunate. But boy, did I learn a lot the hard way.
Talk a little bit about how our approach to acquisitions have changed and the kinds of companies we're acquiring now versus the kinds of companies we acquired in the early days.
Well, I would say our approach has always been a very disciplined approach. When I taught at Washington University about acquisitions, I said, people get deal momentum. In other words, I want to buy this company, somebody else just bid $10 more than me, I need to match that bid. And they get it because they're committed, they want this company, they want the product line, the technology. And then they get it, and they found out they invested too much. They don't get the return. It's disappointing. They got to lay off people. So when I look at the field of acquisitions, we fortunately did not begin with that problem. What has evolved, though, we began buying companies with challenges like we experienced, because that's what I knew how to fix. I mean, all I did was take what I learned fixing our own business and that I'd broken by 1983. Had to fix it. Then because I didn't have money, I had to buy other broken businesses and fix those and try and put them together. So it created this incredible intensity and creativeness, because I didn't buy something that was great and just put my money. I had to build things. So the difference today is that once we went public and ended up $28 million in the bank, we had credibility, but we didn't ever want to be at that risk again. So I said, there's no transaction I would do that would put at risk this business. None. And so we walked away from many deals. And my board used to say to me, I've never seen a CEO that the board didn't need to rein them in, they're getting carried away, rein them in. Warren Shapley would say that to me. I said, I don't want you to have to rein me in. I don't want to ever be broke again, because you hurt a lot of people. A lot of people. And so today, because the company is now, if you take the acquisitions we did from 84 to 87, they're probably 10 or so. I don't remember the exact number. And so we're actually over 100 since I've been doing that. When we talk about we're approaching 100, we're talking approaching 100 since 88. So what we're able to do today is we got much more experience, much more confidence, and we have more people focused on it. So I would say to you, we have migrated away somewhat from companies that were challenged, because that's the way we began. I wasn't good at growing a good company. I had no confidence that I could buy a good company that's in growth markets and do better. I wanted to find companies where I felt comfort that I could fix their problem. So we've vowed to today, much more of our acquisitions now are better companies, good companies that we feel fit, that we can make better. And so we've broadened our range. We're still incredibly focused on diversification, never find ourselves too much in one market or one technology or one customer. So if somebody like InBev acquires Anheuser-Busch, which changed Anheuser-Busch's behavior, it put at risk a lot of companies who depended highly on Anheuser-Busch. So we're very comfortable with our strategy, and actually I think it's evolving. And when we brought Barry-Wehmiller Foresight Partners into the equation, our hybrid equity firm, that really brought some new waves of thinking from some people who came from the private equity field, who blended their experiences with ours. So the biggest difference now is we're not limited to challenge companies, which originally I said that's the only place I feel comfortable. And in our industry, there were plenty of challenge. It's a big industry, lots of challenge companies. So it's dramatically changed, but we've never lost our basic discipline.
We're going to continue the conversation between myself, Mary Rudder, and our CEO, Bob Chapman. Bob covers a number of topics, including what has changed for Barry-Wehmiller since Bob said X in 2013, how companies can truly do good in society, the importance of having a vision, what makes a great leader, the healthcare crisis and its relationship to the workplace, and what his father might think of Barry-Wehmiller today. And we'll start out with Bob talking about why it's important to give your people as much information as possible.
Well, let me use an example. Can you imagine playing a sport like basketball and there's no scoreboard? You're hired to play basketball, you run on the court, you run up and down, you pass the ball, you shoot some, they shoot some, but nobody ever tells you what the score is. So you work really hard to shoot as many baskets as you can, and but most of the sports people can't. Why? I want to know what the score is. Are we behind? Are we ahead? Most people in business don't know what the score is. They're asked to do something. They don't understand what, the financial information is kept private from them. I remember we acquired a company a few years ago, a family-oriented company, and most family-oriented companies say they're private, which means I'm not going to tell you how I did. And there was this lady running a department, that generated quite a bit of revenue. And I said to her, ma'am, she'd been with this small family company for 30 years. And I said, what are your revenue in your department? And she said, I don't know. They don't think I need to know. And I said, you got to be kidding me. So I always say to you, would it be rewarding to play basketball? You might enjoy getting a couple of baskets in occasionally, and you might think maybe you're winning, but you're not sure. And so I would say to you that one of the things we try to do is help people know the score, because people want to know if we're winning or if we're behind, what's our strategy to get ahead. That's part of the game to the very end. And so I would say to you, that's what I mean by that. People want to know. Privately held companies should share financial information, because how do their team members know whether they're creating value? Are they just doing their job? You just do your job. I paid you to do your job. Don't worry about the financial results. I'll worry about it. I think that's very unfortunate and not respectful of the people. They want to know, are we winning or are we not winning? Not just, I'm an accounts receivable manager and I collect accounts receivable all day, but I have no idea how that fits in. So my goal eventually is to give everybody more visibility on whether they're winning and how what they're doing contributes to that winning game.
And that helps them feel more valued.
Right. Because they go home at night and they say, and they can actually talk to their family. How was your day? Well, nobody yelled at me. I didn't get fired. I didn't screw up anything. I mean, is that the way we want people going home? Well, that's the way most people walk home in most businesses today. They don't really know how they're doing. The expression that I hear all the time is, I got 10 things right and I never heard a word, and I got one thing wrong and I got my ass chewed out. And you can't believe the body language when I give a speech. The number of people feel that way. I made one mistake and I got my ass chewed out, but I've been doing this I never had a problem before, but man, they got on top of me. And that's so prevalent in business. So anyway, my view is that what we need to do is focus more on helping people know how they contribute to the overall success of the organization as best we can, which is a challenge, because normally, again, public companies don't like to share too much information because they don't want to get out to the public. Private companies think they're private, so they shouldn't have to share that. And we hire people in jobs and they have no idea.
One other, I think, one thing that we haven't talked about yet, but it's another component to a lot of Barry-Wehmiller's success, especially recently, is the process of visioning. And I think you might have had an experience once, maybe with Cynthia or Kyle, a story that you've told that kind of illustrates that.
Yeah, when Kyle was very young, probably under 10, he was taking a tennis lesson or something. And Cynthia said to him, and I don't know why it stuck to me this way, she said, Kyle, you need to see yourself hitting the ball. You need to visualize hitting the ball. Now you would think, what's the relationship with that in business? Well, that stuck with me for some reason. I don't know why. I've been very blessed with a kind of a creative mind. And I came into business and I said, where are we going? Do we see where we're going? Are we just coming in and responding to stimulus all day? We got a problem here, we got an opportunity there, we got a need here. Because most people that I see in business focus their time on reaction to stimulus, problems or phone call or challenge. And without a vision, how do you make a decision? Well, you deal with this issue this way, this issue this. I believe the job of leadership is to have a vision of where you're going, why you want to go there, and when you get there, why will you have taken your people to a better place? I think as leaders, we are called to be stewards of those people and to be able to share that in a way that everybody understands their role in that process. And so from my standpoint, visioning is critical to a business. Where are you going? Not just how was your results this year, how was the month, where are you going? And do you understand the competitive landscape? Do you understand the dynamics of your market? Can you really talk about the fundamentals in a way that says, give me the ball, I know where we're going? And I think politically that when you see a politician who has kind of a vision for our country or our party, they're much more powerful than they just react to issues. I'm against this. And so I think visioning is a critical part of leadership. It's a critical part of what we do in this company. And when you combine it with economic value added EVA methodology developed by Stern Stewart, you can monetize the future and say, am I creating value in alignment with what are responsible expectations of our shareholders. So EVA methodology was a methodology developed by Stern Stewart, studying publicly traded companies in terms of how the market values them over a period of time, getting rid of some of the emotion, the short term up and down. And we created that, and we as a way of valuing our stock so that everybody would know you can actually monetize all your initiatives and understand the economic impact of that. So it allowed people to relate to how you create value, because that's what we're in charge to do. People put their trust in us, they invest in us, people put their lives in our hands. And if we don't understand how we create value, how do you know where you're going? And how do you know what you're going to do in the future? And if you don't understand the competitive landscape, and I'd say that's one of our bigger challenges, to get people to think that way, because we are, as a society, I think even in our homes, we tend to react to stimulus as opposed to shape our future. And I think that's one of the things that's allowed us to be more successful, as we spend time pausing and thinking about what did we try that worked? What did we try that didn't work? What did we learn from that? And from what we learned, how do we shape a better future? That kind of continuous improvement cycle applied to your business model, so that people feel a sense of confidence that they can put their trust in you.
What's a good example of how visioning has made a difference in a Barry-Wehmiller business?
Our consulting company, Barry-Wehmiller Design Group, probably 12 or 15 years ago, we did what I call typical incremental budgeting. This year I made $1 million, next year I'm going to make $1.2 million, whatever the numbers are. And I was sitting down in the budgeting process with our consulting company, Barry-Wehmiller Design Group, and I could feel that kind of incremental, well, last year we did this, next year we could do that. And I said to the team, what if the potential of our consulting business was only limited by our ability to hire good people and to integrate them into our culture? That was the only limitation. There would be infinite demand for this consulting service of engineering consulting, because it's a huge field and we're a tiny factor. And so the only throttling factor would be how fast we could find good people and integrate them. And so Joe drew the line of kind of the incremental budgeting, which, I don't know, is 5%, 6% of your growth. And when he came back with how fast we could hire and integrate good people, which, if that was your constraint, it almost doubled the projection of the company, and scared Joe to death. And he kind of said, "There's no way, Bob." But guess what happened? Virtually every year thereafter, he hit that number, which was a well over 10% growth rate, because we started thinking differently. We started doing things today so that 2 or 3 years from now, those things materialize. It changed the way we thought, because we could take our vision and we could break it down by offering. We had the consulting platforms of facilities or control systems integration or process engineering. We could break it down. We could break it down by office. And I'd fly out to the Philly office, and Mike Bauer would say to me, my piece of the vision is growth of 20,000 hours, whatever the number is. And I know exactly how I can do it. I got to get 4 new clients. So all of a sudden, everybody was empowered by a piece of the map. But they knew the overall direction, and they knew their piece. And so it was powerful, because now every place I went, everybody could talk to me about my piece of the vision is X, and I feel good about it. So it wasn't just some big, because the big number scared Joe. But when we broke it down, it was very, and they virtually hit their vision objective every year thereafter, except for the 2008-2009 downturn. But the beauty was that because we had all these growth fundamentals, that when we hit the downturn, it took the growth out, but all the new initiatives offset the dramatic decline in some of the others. So it really worked out well.
It's been about 5 years since your TEDx. It was kind of a good kind of moment to kind of crystallize your leadership journey up to that point, the experiences that you had. In the 5 years since then, what are some things that you've learned?
Well, I think at the TEDx time, we felt that we were really blessed with a powerful message, but we didn't have much validation of that. It was just internally, we sensed this. In the last 5 years, the emergence of the Leadership Institute, the interaction we've had with some major corporations of the world, major thought leaders in terms of leadership, that we now realize that, well, it's my belief, my firm belief, that we were chosen by some higher power to show the world the way it was intended to be, the way we're intended to live and work together, where people go home each night knowing that who they are and what they do matters. And another piece of that, in addition to all the external validation with clients now that have asked us to help them be this major organization of the world asking us to be this way. The other piece is that when I gave the TEDx talk, we talked about sending people home fulfilled. But quite honestly, the revelation recently that a major health institution said that the person you report to at work is more important to your health than your family doctor. That shocks people when I say that. I just saw it. I just talked to a group of CEOs of hospitals, and their body language, it was just amazing, the reaction that they had. And that is startling. I don't think anybody ever given the opportunity to be a leader in an organization said, now, I just want you to understand something, that the way you're going to treat the 10 people, the 5 people, the 20 people, the 60 people under your care is going to profoundly affect their marriage, the way they raise their kids, and their health. You understand this? So they'd say, well, wait a second, I thought this was promotion where I got a nice car and a nice raise. You didn't tell me I was going to affect people's health and their family. And so what we've learned is that the way we lead profoundly affects the way people live and profoundly affects people's health, which puts fuel on the fire of the logic of our everybody matters, the extraordinary power of caring for people like family. We have ourselves in a healthcare crisis in this country. And I tell the CEOs I have the privilege of talking before, if you're complaining about the healthcare crisis, just look in the mirror. You are the problem. We are kind of self-destructing as a civilization. So I'd say to you that's some of the real advances, I think, in our message is that, A, it's been dramatically validated by some of the world's leading institutions. We first thought, gee, it's amazing. Everybody says, when they visited us, I've never seen anything like this. You need to share it with the world. But now that we have shared it with the world, we've seen it validated by people voting with their dollars and their time to hear this message and cause them to think about this message, that we've dramatically advanced our thinking in terms of the power of this message to kind of heal the hurt in this world. If every organization, traditionally called nonprofit, I like to call them for good organizations, and public and private institutions, if they would simply embrace the profound impact they make on people's lives, we could profoundly change the world as we know it. We tend to focus on political leaders solving our problems. It's constantly somebody running for office who tells you how they're going to solve your problems. There's only one place we can solve our problems, and it's within our span of control. If everybody simply cared for the people that we have the privilege of leading, we would profoundly change the world as we know it. And right now, it makes me sad to see young men and women enter the professional field knowing the way they're going to be treated and the way it's going to affect their health and their marriage.
There's a story that I always like you to tell, and you tell it every once in a while. And I don't think we've had you on the podcast saying it, but you had dinner with somebody once.
Yeah.
And you asked him what the thing he was most proud of in his company. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, probably now 7 or 8 years ago, there was a gentleman who was I'd gotten to know, very prominent gentleman, very wealthy gentleman in the private equity field, a really fine gentleman. And he had heard my speech someplace. I don't think he heard my TED Talk, but he heard, and he flew out to have dinner with me. And I don't even know what caused me to ask this question, because it was just kind of a dinner. And I said, "What are you really proud of?" He said, "Well, I'm known for my major gift to the college I went to, but what I'm really proud of is our minority student athletic scholarship program." I said, "Well, that's wonderful. How many minority student athletes do you help a year?" I think he said 6 or 8. I said, "Well, that's wonderful." I said, "I'm just curious, how many people work for your organization in the world? Do you think it's 100,000? He said, "Yeah, it's probably 100,000. I said, "So what you're telling me is you don't really care about those 100,000 people but you really get a great deal of pride out of those 6 or 8. And he looked at me and he said, I never thought about that. And my statement is always the greatest act of, and we have a society where we celebrate leaders who write large checks to the United Way, the American Cancer Society, other events. And aren't they wonderful people? What a wonderful institution. And as a gentleman who came out to speak, I heard about, who said, while we do good in the world, could we do less harm? And what he meant was, it's wonderful to write those checks to charities. We genuinely appreciated the generosity. But how did you get your money? How did this gentleman I met get his money so he could help those minority students? And I say the greatest act of charity is not the checks you write, but the care for the people you have the privilege of leading, who give you the opportunity to have the wealth to write that check. And so that's my focus, is that if we would see our greatest act of charity, the people we had the privilege of leading, not the checks we write in the society, we'd have a dramatically different society.
It's lately there's been kind of some a little bit of reflection this year, passing of your mom, and then the great opportunity to with the project in Shaw Park, which was dedicated to your parents. You came in to the business, your dad wanted somebody who he could trust in the business. And then you were kind of thrust into the leadership role when your dad passed. What do you think that he'd think of the company now and all the different parts of the company, the leadership message, the way our people feel and the way people feel about our company?
Well, the way I'd like to answer that question is 5 or 6 years ago I was at dinner. Some lady, very nice lady, sat next to me, and I always say I'm too old for trivial conversations. So I was challenging her about what she was going to do with her life, and she looked at me and threw an equally good challenge, and she said, what do you think heaven looks like? I've never had anybody ask me that, so I hadn't really thought about it. And so I thought a minute, and I said, to answer your question, I think heaven would look like sitting down with my dad and explaining to him what happened to this company that he tried for 23 years to give a future to, but struggled to keep it alive when he joined the company. And when I was thinking about that, people will say to me, well, I'm sure he knows, with us, people with faith would say, well, he knows. I say, yeah, but I want to see his face. I want to see him say, you got to be kidding me. Because, I was not a kid that he thought had turned out too well, which he was probably more right than wrong, given my high school and early college experience. And B, that he'd spent 23 years trying to keep this company alive and give it a future, and just couldn't break it out of the kind of the historic rut it was in. And so I use the analogy, it'd be like us sitting here and seeing the moon and saying, wouldn't it be amazing to be like the original astronauts to land on the moon? Just can you imagine even landing on the moon, sitting on the moon when you sit up there? And then the next evening we're sitting around having a beer together, and we look around, why is it so dusty here? And we look and say, wait a second, we're on the moon. How in the hell did we get on the moon? And that's honestly the way I feel. When you understand kind of what we talked about in the brokenness of the 80s, where we couldn't pay a bill, that we're in an old industry with old technology, and we sit here today with people putting their faith in us and believing in us, and the stories being written about us, the amazing opportunity to share it through the book, through the TEDx talk, through the speeches we get to give today. It is a joy beyond words. But clearly I would love to see my dad's face, because there's no way since he's already dead, I can't kill him twice, but they would kill him. He would die. He'd say, oh my God. He wouldn't even imagine, because he spent 23 years trying to get it out of this rut. He kept it alive, but he couldn't break the pattern. To think of it's a $3 billion company today, with the caliber of investors we have today, and the faith people put in us, and the talks, and the way it's helped his family and other people, it'd be like landing on the moon to him, beyond your imagination. This is beyond my wild. We had a goal of getting to 100 million in 1988. to get to 100 million, and that plan that we had to get to 100 million got us to, this year will be about 3 billion.
So, and then if he looked at you and said, okay, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? And you had, give us your elevator pitch on how'd you make that happen?
Oh, I asked my mom. I used to ask my mom before she had Alzheimer's. I said, Mom, what do you think you did with me? And she said, I have no idea. She did. Because she just liked me as a kid, but she had no feeling I had any potential. And the simple answer is that I would say to you, to my dad, that somehow I was blessed with the ability. I'm an eternal optimist. In the worst of times, I never gave up. I could always see tomorrow, and I come in every day enthusiastic to go to the next day. And I was able to see value where other people were not, because there was no elements of traditional value left to see. So if I didn't find some nuances of value that nobody else had seen. So I would say to you, that is what has driven our company to today. I'd say, Dad, that I was given not intellectual intelligence, but common sense. I just have the ability to see things other people can't see and come up with creative solutions. And I personally don't think you can be a great leader without being an optimist. I think a great leader gives the people in their care a grounded sense of hope for a better future. That is our responsibility. And I don't think people understand that. We don't teach that, but that's our responsibility, is to give the people in our care a grounded sense of hope for a better future and be able to articulate it. And because people put their faith in us. Do they decide to have a child? Do they have enough job stability financially they can afford a child? Can they buy a home? Can they buy a car? When you hear the stories in our book where somebody, lost their job, couldn't afford their child, was collecting aluminum, Ken Coppins. It really takes seriously when every time you hire somebody that they're putting their faith in you.
Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter @Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.